Good afternoon. Thank everyone for bringing part of their day to this event. This certainly is a very important election. Without an incumbent, 12 people are running. Your vote is going to be very critical. A very small number of votes will probably separate those that may get on to the general election from the primary. And I'm asking for your support. One of the big issues for me is term limits. The fact that we have people in Congress for 48 years when the Constitution called for a 2-year term tells us that there's issues with this re-election. 23 states have passed laws asking for term limits, but Supreme Court 5-4 turned that over and said you can't limit that term. There is now an amendment being circulated on the internet asking for term limits, and I ask you to go there and sign up for that, because until we get the entrenched power blocks out of Congress, not much is going to be done. One of the seriously entrenched power blocks is, if you've seen Time magazine this week, you notice on the front of it, there's this picture of China, and calls out their corruption and wants to know if China can face the truth. And it really is hard for me to see on the front page of a major US magazine that we're concerned about China's dealing with truth. We've got truth issues here. Yeah, we got some serious truth issues here, and it's essential that we bring in a special prosecutor to take a look at 9/11. The counsel to the 9/11 Commission wrote a book, Ground Truth, and he said essentially he was lied to, he had no information, any information that was controversial was redacted. We need to know what happened there, because all of our civil liberties are being stripped in search of a terrorist, and the terrorists, it looks like, really don't exist. So this whole thing, this false flag movement, we need to kind of deal with that, because if we don't, we're just going to keep progressing with Patriot Act, Military Commission Act, Homeland Security Act, Anti-Protest Act. And so who you elect today is critical, because every Democrat, all 80 progressive Democrats, voted against the right to protest, the right to assemble, speak, seek redress on federal properties. So it's hard to know how we're going to approach this. My plan is, on the very first day, to file a Freedom of Information Act for the 80 videos that document what happened at the Pentagon, as well as to work on this, calling a special prosecutor to kind of just clean the air on this. I mean, the rest of the world wants us to get beyond this, and we can't do it until we can face the truth. It's not going to be easy, and right now they're converging military and police, Tennessee and Texas. They're pulling cars over to check for seatbelts using the military, so we're being desensitized. As the soldiers come home, put them to work in the U.S. We live in a constitutional free zone, 100 miles of the border. They don't need a judge's order for a search warrant. They don't need to identify what they're looking for or where they're looking for. They can just usurp all that. And if they call you a terrorist, they can assassinate you without probable cause, access to confront your accuser, or any of those basic rights. So I would like to rescind all laws bearing on civil liberties since 9/11, once we decide what happened at 9/11 and who was willing to kind of, in my mind, commit one of the major crimes against humanity of all time. Yeah, like I said, it's not going to be easy, but part of the answer, if you got an extra $100, you can buy the National Defense Authorization Act, signed into law December 31st, 2011. And I guarantee you, this is worse than a Stephen King novel. It's absolutely horrifying. There are a number of different websites out there. In case you have not seen them, I appear to be one of the last people to kind of open my eyes. So it amazes me. I've been doing a survey for the last 2 to 3 months. Every one of my patients is like, oh yeah, it's, obviously it was just a cover-up. Thing's horrible. But what do we do with this cover-up? Supreme Court said we got to strip search people looking for terrorists. There was a black man in a BMW, a passenger. They stripped him twice. He was so pissed he took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said 5-4. I'm sorry, man. You could have been a terrorist. 13 million Americans are arrested. If you do not have an audible bell on your bicycle, they can strip search you. They strip search they don't. It's dehumanizing. So you desensitize, put the military all around, you dehumanize with these kind of psyops maneuvers. And where's this all going? And this is all in search of this. You may have seen recently the panty bomber. It was 2 or 3 days ago. They're pounding away. This is a war for the minds of Americans. And a lot of people believe that a couple of folks with box cutters commandeered these planes. This is all a function of our being attacked by terrorists. And so we're struggling to kind of get enough of Americans to kind of look at the facts to call for a terror gate, find out what happened, get beyond it, get our civil liberties back. A very important documentary out there is for the architects and engineers. It's A&E 9/11. This is a group of people around the world in their native tongue with English subtitles saying essentially it's impossible that this happened from diesel fuel. Diesel fuel burns at 1,000 degrees, in open air, and steel melts at 1,500. So it's ludicrous. The story that's been passed on and now is being driven home with these panty raids and shoe bombers and all this type of stuff. So 2 years, give me 2 years, give me one election cycle, and if I come home alive, I'll be very happy. But if not, you can believe that I would rather die revealing this hand of tyranny than live under its thumb, and its thumb is coming down big. In addition to that, I am a world's cannabis expert. I've got kids, a dozen of them, that have Dravet's. They had 300 to 400 seizures a day. They're now going 3 to 4 days without a seizure, stopping their Topamax. They're at maximum dose. I have children with brain tumors that were sent home on morphine to die, that are now 2 years out with the tumor gone and the scar tissue resolved. These are people that have had, this one child's had 39 hours of surgery, 10 times lethal chemotherapy, on bone marrow transplant, and then went into 42 days of radiation. Tumor grew back every time. They finally sent her home to Fort Bragg on oxygen morphine on hospice. Local pediatrician put her on raw cannabis, and I can't really explain it. I just know that 2 years later she's alive, she's off hospice, the tumor's gone, and all of the scar tissue's gone. In addition, Cannabis is involved in, it can reduce the size of heart attack by 66%, and this is in mouse models. Tie off a coronary artery, reduce a heart attack. If you're getting 5 milligrams per kilogram of CBD, your heart attack is 66% smaller. If you could produce a drug that would do that, you would have a blockbuster billionaire drug. It also reduces insulin-dependent diabetes by 58%. If you look at the 4 top medical conditions, coronary vascular disease, top killer of men and women, almost $2 billion, $197 billion just for that. Cancer, over $200 billion. Diabetes, Alzheimer's. Those 4 conditions equal the military budget. And we do have financial problems. I mean, right now we're going to have to remove $600 billion from the domestic services. So I'd like to promise you all kinds of things. It's going to be an ugly year as we go through that sequester. The best minds in the Senate and Congress wouldn't even meet to try to deal with that $1.2 trillion deficit that we were running up. And we're now running up over $2 trillion a year. We know that this just can't go on. And so this is going to be a difficult year because the majority in Congress is going to try to push the military $600 billion onto domestic. So if we get away with just $600 billion in cuts, we'll be lucky. So if we can do something with cannabis that can reduce this healthcare thing by $600 billion, there's money there to reinvest in single payer. The private insurance company makes 30% overhead, Medicare makes 3%. You could shift that 27% into provision of services. If we reduce medical conditions using preventative measures that are patented by the federal government. The Department of Health and Human Services holds a patent on CBD and its benefits. And if we just employ that and reduce the cost, then we really could provide services even in a time when we're in severe constriction as we try to deal with this very, very ugly financial situation that's in play. Also genome, I'm a microbiologist. We don't need to just label it, we need to stop it. There's a lot of insinuations that they're putting terminator genes into cannabis. Cannabis is a dietary essential. It helps you prevent conditions, and if we make ourselves allergic to it, that opportunity is gone, and that really is pretty horrifying. It's a global resource. We need to protect the genome. Well, obviously we need to label it, but we need to protect it, because once you contaminate it, it's 100 million years before you can change surface antigens back to where we can eat soybeans as opposed to become allergic to it. Clean energy, I've spent 20 years living on the ocean, 15 patents in scuba diving. Right now in Australia, biopower is generating subsurface hydrokinetic energy. This district has hundreds of miles of coastline. We can provide enough energy for western United States, except that the oil industry owns the executive branch, owns Congress, and they're not really interested in a lot of free electrical energy, but we need that. Another thing that we need is the use of hemp. Henry Ford ran his car on hemp oil. And what hemp does is it takes 20 CO2 carbon molecules out of the air, makes an oil, you burn it, you generate 20 CO2 carbon molecules, you put it back in the air. So there's zero net CO2 production with hemp oil. And in addition, we can take hemp, press it into lumber, hempcrete, and we can put it in long-term storage and begin to remove the 31 billion tons of CO2 that we put in the atmosphere last year. We're now at 394 parts per million as of March 2012. 280 was the last highest measurement. And if the ice slides off of Iceland and we raise the sea level by 20 feet, that'll change the coastal face of the United States and the world in a real negative way. So I often get painted as a single issue candidate, and I do. I mean, Mike Thompson, he was there for 14 years. He passed 9 bills. That's about 1 per term. So I can list 50,000 things that are wrong, but if I'm going to list one, it's going to be Terrorgate, prosecute the criminals, give us our civil liberties back, and let's go ahead with protecting the environment and the genome and get people in Congress that are responsive to our needs, that will allow alternative energies that can help protect the planet, and single payer. I mean, the American Insurance Group doesn't want to lose that 30%. I mean, that's a chunk of change. And we bailed them out for $5 trillion. So it's not going to be easy to get them to go single payer. That's the reason it didn't go this time. And like I said, there's a lot of things wrong. One thing, let's do what we're asking China to do. Let's face the truth. Let's get on the bottom of it, and let's get on to the next issue. But the one thing I want to do is to get a special prosecutor and begin to open this thing up so that we can kind of get this abscess out, get our civil liberties back, get the military out of our law enforcement, get the drones out of our sky. They closed only one of the few dispensaries on the coast that was providing raw cannabis, and I would send people with terminal cancer, we're talking stage 4 metastatic cancer, ALS, that had driven here from the East Coast. This child with brain tumors was going there to get her fresh cannabis, and the federal government sends that dispensary a letter stating we're going to seize their property. I wish their children were being treated there, and then they would look at what they're doing. So we need to stand up. One area, if I had one more comment, when they prohibited alcohol, they had to amend the Constitution. They had to get 3/4 of the states to agree to amend the Constitution to prohibit alcohol. Then when they decided to terminate it, they had to amend the Constitution to terminate that prohibition. They forgot to do that with cannabis. They have no authority in this area other than we run in fear from our federal government. And Thomas Jefferson says, when you're in fear of your government, you're in tyranny. And that is where we're at. We just don't want to look at it.